Good morning. We are going to finish A Long Walk Through Water today. Yay! The end is here. We're going to be reading chapters 17 and 18. Before we get started with our reading, let's quickly recap chapters 15 and 16. So we know that Naya's village finally has water coming from the well, though it has to go through a few more steps in order for it to be deemed safe to drink. Just as we read in the last few chapters, the water continues to come from the well very muddy, but the people, the visitors that came in to drill the well have been very positive with the fact that the water will eventually come out of the well clean to drink. Obviously, this brings a lot of excitement to the villagers. There's also a lot of excitement on Salva's end. He is chosen finally to go to America, so he has officially left Africa, and he is going to Rochester, New York. He has to travel on multiple planes, making pit stops in Europe before he's able to get over to America, but he absolutely is getting a very quick lesson about what the word winter means. Throughout a good section of the text, he is talking about how it's so strange to wear so many clothes, right? He has pants and long sleeves and sweaters and sweatshirts and jackets, and all this is very, very new to him. So he's very surprised about this whole winter thing and snow and what this all looks like and feels like. He also has a lot of excitement about being on a plane for the very first time and having to travel with his group. And then he has to travel into that last plane to get him into Rochester on his own. And, that's a very exciting yet kind of scary time for him. And at the end, he also meets his new family who live in Rochester, New York. They quickly take him in, give him another jacket so he gets even more clothing, but they quickly take him in and he quickly starts his studies. He joins a volleyball team. So he's very, very nicely integrating himself into American society. So on that note, let's go ahead and get started with chapter 17 and 18. I'm very excited to share the ending of the story with you. I think you're going to enjoy it. So here we go. Chapter 17, Southern Sudan, 2009. What do you think we are building here? Naya's father asked, smiling. A house, Naya guessed, or a barn? Her father shook his head. Something better, he said. A school. Naya's eyes widened. The nearest school was half a day's walk from their home. Naya knew this because Deb had wanted to go there, but it was too far. A school? She echoed. Yes, he replied. With the well here, no one will have to go to the pond anymore, so all the children will be able to go to school. Naya stared at her father. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. When at last she was able to speak, it was only in a whisper. All the children, Papa? The girls too? Her father's smile grew broader. Yes, Naya, girls too, he said. Now go and fetch water for us. And he returned to his work, scything the long grass. Naya went back and picked up the plastic can. She felt as if she were flying. School! She would learn to read and write. Sudan and Rochester, New York, 2003 to 2007. Salva stood at the foot of one of the beds in the crowded clinic. Hello, he said. Hello, the patient replied politely. I have come to visit you, Salva said. To visit me? The man frowned. But who are you? You are ALWTW Ch, aren't you? Yes, that is my name. Salva smiled, his insides trembling. Even though his father looked older now, Salva had recognized him right away. But it was as if his eyes needed help from his ears. He needed to hear his father's words to believe he was real. I am your son. I am Salva. The man looked at Salva and shook his head. No, he said. It is not possible. Yes, Salva said. It's me, father. He moved to the side of the bed. ALWTW reached out and touched the arm of this tall stranger beside him. Salva, he whispered. Can it really be you? Salva waited. ALWTW stared for a long moment. Then he cried out, Salva, my son, my son. His body shaking with sobs of joy, he reached up to hug Salva tightly. It had been almost 19 years since they had last seen each other. ALWTW sprinkled water on his son's head. the Dinka way of blessing someone who was lost and is found again. Everyone was sure you were dead, Muin Dut said. The village wanted to kill a cow for you. That was how Salva's people mourned the death of a loved one. I would not let them, his father said. I never gave up hope that you were still alive somewhere. And my mother? Salva asked, barely daring to hope. His father smiled. She is back in the village. Salva wanted to cry, wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. I must see her. But his father shook his head. There is still war near Lunarik, my son. If you went there, both sides would try to force you to fight with them. You must not go. There was so much more to talk about. His father told Salva that his sisters were there with his mother. But of his 3 brothers, only Ring had survived the war. Arik, the oldest, and Kual, the youngest, were both dead. Little Kual. Salva closed his eyes for a few moments, trying to picture his brothers through a haze of time and grief. He learned more about his father's illness. Years of drinking contaminated water had left Muin Dut's entire digestive system riddled with guinea worms. Sick and weak, he had walked almost 300 miles to come to this clinic and was barely alive by the time he finally arrived. Salva and his father had several days together, but all too soon it was time for Salva to return to America. His father would be leaving the clinic shortly as well. The surgery he had undergone had been successful, and he would soon be strong enough to make the long walk home. I will come to the village, Salva promised, as soon as it is safe. We will be waiting there for you. His father promised in turn. Salva pressed his face tightly to his father's as they hugged goodbye, their tears flowing and blending together. On the plane back to the United States, Salva replayed in his mind every moment of his visit with his father. He felt again the coolness on his brow when his father had sprinkled the water blessing on him. And an idea came to him, an idea of what he might be able to do to help the people of Sudan. Could he do it? It would take so much work. Perhaps it would be too difficult. But how would he know unless he tried? Back in Rochester, Salva began working on his idea. There were, it seemed, a million problems to be solved. He needed a lot of help. Chris and Louise gave him many suggestions. Scott, a friend of theirs, was an expert in setting up projects like the one Salva had in mind. He and Salva worked together for hours and days, which grew into weeks and months. Along the way, Salva met other people who wanted to help. He was grateful to all of them, but even with their help, it was much more work than he had imagined. Salva had to raise money for the project, and there was only one way to do this. He would have to talk to people and ask them to give money. The first time Salva spoke in front of an audience was in a school cafeteria. About 100 people had come to hear him. There was a microphone at the front of the room. Salva's knees were shaking as he walked to the mic. He knew that his English was still not very good. What if he made mistakes in pronunciation? What if the audience couldn't understand him? But he had to do it. If he didn't talk about the project, no one would learn about it. No one would donate money, and he would never be able to make it work. Salva spoke into the microphone. Hello, he said. At that moment, something went wrong with the sound system. The speakers behind him let out a dreadful screech. Salva jumped and almost dropped the mic. His hands trembling, he looked out at the audience. People were smiling or chuckling. A few of the children were holding their ears. They all looked very friendly, and seeing the children made him remember. It was not the first time he had spoken in front of a large group of people. Years before, when he was leading those boys on their walk from the Ethiopian refugee camp to the one in Kenya, he had called a meeting every morning and evening. The boys would line up facing him, and he would talk to them about their plans. All those eyes looking at him, but every face interested in what he had to say. It was the same here. The audience had come to the school cafeteria because they wanted to hear him. Thinking of that made him feel a little better, and he spoke into the mic again. Hello, he repeated, and this time only his own voice came from the speakers. He smiled in relief and went on. I'm here to talk to you about a project for Southern Sudan. A year passed, then 2, then 3. Salva spoke to hundreds of people in churches, at civic organizations, in schools. Would he ever be able to turn his idea into reality? Whenever he found himself losing hope, Salva would take a deep breath and think of his uncle's words. A step at a time. One problem at a time. Just figure out this one problem. Day by day, solving one problem at a time, Salva moved toward his goal. That's the end of chapter 17. This would be a perfect time to take a 1-minute break to stretch your legs. Go ahead and leave this video on the note, and when you're ready to start back up again with chapter 18, the last chapter of this novel, go ahead and hit resume. Chapter 18, Southern Sudan in 2009. Naya waited her turn in line. She was holding a plastic bottle. The well was finally finished. The gravel had been put down to make a foundation, the pump had been installed, and the cement had been poured and left to dry. Before the pump was used for the first time, the villagers all gathered around. The leader of the workers brought out a big sign made of blue canvas. The canvas had writing on it. The writing was in English, but the leader spoke to Naya's uncle, and Uncle told everyone what the sign said. In honor of Elm Street School, Uncle said. This is the name of a school in America. The students at the school raised the money for this well to be dug. Uncle held up one end of the sign. The workers' leader held up the other end. Everyone else stood around it, and one of the workers took their picture. The picture would be sent to the American school so the students could see the well and the people who were now using it. Then the villagers all got in line to wait their turn for water from the new well. When Naya reached the head of the line, she smiled shyly at her uncle, who paused in his work for a moment to smile back at her. Then he began moving the pump handle, up and down, up and down. A stream of water flowed from the mouth of the pump. Naya held her bottle underneath the pump mouth. The bottle filled up quickly. She stepped aside to let the next person fill a bottle, and then she drank. The water was delicious. It wasn't warm or muddy like the water from the pond. It was cool and clear. Naya stopped drinking and held up the bottle so she could look at it. Funny that something without any color at all could look so nice. She drank a few more sips, then glanced around. Everyone had a bottle or a cup. They were drinking that lovely water, or waiting in line for more, or talking and laughing. It was a celebration. An old granddad standing not far from Naya shook his head. In a loud voice he said, "This is where we used to gather for our bonfire celebrations. I've been sitting on this ground my whole life, and all those years I never knew that I was sitting on top of this good water." Everyone around him laughed. Naya laughed too. In a few more days, the school would be finished. Naya and Depp and Akir would all go to school along with the other children. Next year, there would be a marketplace where the villagers could sell and buy vegetables and chickens and other goods. There was even talk of a clinic someday, a medical clinic, so they wouldn't have to walk so far to get help as they had to when Akir was ill. It was the well that was bringing the village all these good things. But the well was not for their use alone. People would come from miles around to fetch the good, clean water. Naya knew from listening to the grown-ups that the crew leader had made many arrangements concerning the well. No one was ever to be refused water. Some of the villagers would be responsible for maintaining the well. They would be busy with this new work, so the entire village was to help them with their crops and cattle. Other villagers, including Naya's uncle, would resolve any disputes that arose. The well would change their lives in many ways. I will never again have to walk to the pond for water, Naya thought. She wandered around a little, sipping at her cool, fresh drink. Then she caught sight of the crew leader. He was standing by himself, leaning against one of the trucks and watching her uncle work the pump. Depp saw her looking at the man. "That man? The boss of the workers?" Depp said. "You know he is Dinka?" Naya looked at Depp in astonishment. The Dinka and the Weir did not look very different physically. You had to look at the scar patterns on people's faces to tell the tribes apart. Dinka scar patterns were different from those of the Nuer. But the crew leader had no scars on his face. Naya had heard some of the teenage boys talking about that, wondering why he had no scars when clearly he was a grown man. The leader's assistant was Nuir. So were most of the crew. They all had Nuir scars. Naya hadn't thought about it much, but she realized now she had always assumed that the leader was Nuir too. The Dinka and the Nuir were enemies, had been for hundreds of years. Why would a Dinka bring water to us? She wondered aloud. I heard Uncle and Father talking about him, Depp said. He has drilled many wells for his own people. This year, he decided to drill for the Nuir as well. Depp had not really answered Naya's question. He probably doesn't know the answer, she thought. But now Naya felt there was something she had to do. She walked over to where the man was standing. He didn't notice her at first, so she waited quietly. Then he saw her. Hello, he said. Shyness flooded through Naya. For a moment, she didn't think she would be able to speak. She looked down at the ground, then at the stream of water still flowing from the pump mouth. And she found her voice. Thank you, she said, and looked up at him bravely. Thank you for bringing the water. The man smiled. What is your name? He asked. I am Naya. I am happy to meet you, Naya, he said. My name is Salva. And that's the end of A Long Walk to Water. It definitely was a long journey to be able to get here, but I'm glad that both of our characters finally had a chance to meet each other. Here is a picture of the real Salva Dutt. Remember I told you that Salva is a real person, so he is the man there on your left. The author of our novel, A Long Walk to Water, Linda Sue Park, is there on his right. There are quite a few pictures of them together as he still maintains contact with her. I mean, obviously, they probably have a very close relationship considering she told every detail of his entire journey to be able to get the people of Southern Sudan clean water. On that note, it's the end. We've done it. We've reached the end of A Long Walk to Water and we've read an entire novel together. Hope you enjoyed this story. I'll see you soon.